Welcome to the NectarTV podcast. This is episode 3, and today we're talking about our recent webinar that we did this week about Nectar for Microsoft Teams PSTN calling, testing, and troubleshooting. And today we've got our very own Tim Armstrong and Ken Lasco. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Howdy. Nice to be
Thanks
here.
for having us.
So why don't you guys, we'll kick it off again if you guys can just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tim, you want to get us started?
Sure, happy to. My name's Tim Armstrong. I work with the product management team here at Nectar, which means our job is basically to take the product requirements that come from our field and our customers and our partners and work that through and get that out into development. And as part of that, we own responsibility for the roadmap, and that includes our support for Microsoft Teams.
Yep, and that's where I come in. I do exactly what that guy just said, except specifically for Microsoft technologies and of course Teams.
All right. And I'm Stephen Purcell. I'm our Senior Director of Engineering Program Management. So I take everything that these guys give me and we translate that over to our development group, and we actually get it built and pushed out to the field. So
you're the guy we yell at when things aren't done, right? Is that right?
How we dreamed them up to be. Yeah.
Why doesn't this look like anything like I envisioned?
Right on. So this is, again, this kind of a follow-up to our webinar that we had this week around PSTN calling. But kind of first, let's get into how's your summer going? How's distancing going this summer?
Well, up here in Canada, I tell you, it's a different story than down in the States. Things are opened up pretty well. It's been like very, very gradual, but keeping a close eye, lots of testing. Like in our province, 15 million people, we get like 70, 80 new cases every day. So in our town, like we go days, like we got 150,000 people in this town, we go days without even one case.
That's good.
So we've beat it so far, but worried about what's going to happen in the fall when kids start going back to school.
Yeah. How long until you guys go back to school?
2 weeks. 2 weeks, just after Labor Day.
Yeah, we start.
It's gonna
Monday.
be oh really? It's gonna be staggered, so they're gonna go back over a couple weeks. So it's gonna still be a while yet.
Yeah, my wife's a teacher. She went back Monday this week, and they're all remote. And then my kids start Monday, but they're going to be remote.
Wow.
So, you guys, vacations? Have you taken any vacations? Or you're about to?
Yeah. About to, heading up north to going to a beach villa or like a beachside resort sort of thing. Just having a cottage just on a beachside town up north on Lake Huron. Looking very much forward to it, and I'm stupid enough. I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. I'm going to ride my bicycle. That's 190 kilometers to this town, and for some reason I thought it'd be a great idea to go do that. But the closer it gets to that time, the less of a good idea it's starting to seem. But
that car
so far I'm going to do it.
Nice now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, a car for an hour and a half, or a bicycle for 7 or 8 hours. Bicycles, still leaning towards the bike. We'll see.
Tim, what about you?
Good luck with that. Yeah, no, we have been, fortunately, we live in a very small town in Eastern Washington. And, I'd say for the most part, things have been not normal, certainly nothing like normal, but, we've got, you can go sit outside, do the sidewalk thing, all of those kinds of things. I think people are starting to be responsible again, but there was a little blip there where maybe people weren't as responsible as they were supposed to be. But it's really, it's just staying put, feel bad for the kids, but.
Yeah, for sure. Same. We had just kind of a staycation, right? We stayed around the house this year. I think that's driven my little girls just crazy. Not being able to play with friends.
Staycation is terrible. Who invented that word?
I don't know.
Anyway, staycation.
I don't know. It's awful. We usually go to the beach every summer, kind of down to the.
Yeah.
We usually go pretty close down to the Galveston area. It's not the prettiest of beaches, but it's a close beach.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Well,
thank goodness for Teams. Yeah.
Right. So I guess we'll kind of get into. So Tim, I watched the webinar.
Yep.
Lots of detail in the webinar. And really, when you kick the webinar off, I think one of the things that was just stood out was all of the different terms Microsoft has for calling features and different product types that they have and etc. I know we're going to talk about PSTN calling, but it seemed like even around just this one topic for PSTN calling, there was just, I've never seen so many terms in my life. Can you kind of help us out with like summarizing what are we looking at here?
Sure, sure. So I think it's important to kind of paint the picture and give some context to what Microsoft is trying to do with Teams and really what the history of the platform is. Obviously, the platform spent a good part of its time, or Microsoft's, I should say, Microsoft's unified communication solution was Link for many years, right? And then the company bought Skype, and then there was a question of how do we take this Skype asset and the Link asset, and then they came up with Skype for Business, which really was neither Link or Skype. It was sort of eventually it became Link for the cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think is a good
Let's
way
be
of saying
honest,
it.
Skype for Business was a search and replace for Link. Like that's all they did. Let's be honest, they really didn't change much.
It's yeah, it was pretty much Link in the cloud, and then it just became really clear that that wasn't the platform to scale. But in the meantime, you got all sorts of customers out there who had adopted Microsoft technology, and they were using it for not just conferencing. They were using it for what that we used to call PBX replace. So they were ripping out phone systems and using Link, and then Skype for Business as their phone system. So when you're replacing a phone system, there's just a ton of technology and features and capability that has to go into that goes way beyond what you would need for a conferencing app. If you think about what a lot of organizations need in order to have their phones work as they need them, you got to have all sorts of automatic call distribution and call queues and boss admin features, call parking, just tons of stuff that you got to have that you don't need in a UC solution or in a conferencing solution rather. So there's quite a lot of features that they had to add to Teams in order to enable that. The way Microsoft decided to do that is by creating something that they called Microsoft Phone System. And Microsoft Phone System is not really a distinct product from Teams, but it's important to think about it somewhat distinct from Teams. You can't get Microsoft Phone System without Teams, but yet it is a separate product. So when it comes to enabling that for regular phone calls over the PSTN, you have Microsoft Phone System, and then you've got two choices. You're either going to connect that through Microsoft calling plans, which means that Microsoft is your telecom. They become your telco carrier. Or you're going to choose to bring your own carrier to the party, and that's the direct routing. Mm-hmm. And so when you strip away all the jargon, what it really means is that you want to take Teams and you want to connect it to the public telephone network. Mm-hmm. And there's two options for that: Microsoft calling plans or direct routing.
Well, what's that path look like? If I'm working from home, my call is going to connect to Microsoft's cloud. And
yep.
If I have direct, right, is that going to come back into my organization's network and then go out?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Unless you have media bypass enabled. If you're working from home, actually, it doesn't matter if you have media bypass enabled. If you're working from home, it's going to go exactly through that path that you just said.
Right.
It's going to go up to Microsoft's cloud, and then it's going to go back to your company's data center, out the SBC, and into the PSTN. If you were in the office, then you can enable media bypass, in which case we just the media path doesn't go to Microsoft's cloud in that case.
It goes directly
it just
out. Yeah.
Jumps out the SBC.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when you have Microsoft calling, it obviously heads out to Microsoft, and then it goes out from Microsoft's data center there
to the various carriers that Microsoft uses in the background, right, to connect to the PSTN. Yeah.
Right. I don't know. My first scenario just feels like there's a lot of possibilities for things to go wrong there. Bouncing to Microsoft, bouncing down to the company side, bouncing out over the network. How many components does that touch between here and there? I mean, you start with this little thing on your ear, right? And then all of those paths out to get to the thing on the other person's ear. There's a lot.
Yeah, no
There's a
question.
lot of paths, right? There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and a lot of potential for poor quality to happen, right? And so
Mhm.
that's why you
And
need something.
if you're trying to connect it to some kind of a legacy infrastructure for your telephony infrastructure, if you do have some, some type of other phone system on premise, whether that be Skype for Business on prem or Skype for Business on prem, or you've got some other premises based, UC or telephony solution, or you have, analog lines, right? There's still analog lines out there.
Well,
So all of those things, it definitely there's a lot to this infrastructure for direct routing for sure.
yeah, it's something that we take for granted, just hearing somebody's voice on the other end, and the teams that sit in the middle to connect all that kind of stuff. You never really think about what it takes to make that happen. Well, people who aren't in
If
that
you're a
field,
UC admin, if you're a UC admin, you
think about it
do.
all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Tim?
I was going to say, if you're a UC admin, you think about it all the time.
Right.
Your audience probably thinks about it quite a lot.
That's right. So, Ken, we kind of talked about these environments, the complexity it is. What are some of the challenges people are having managing these environments? I mean, I know that, Tim mentioned several different types of environments here, and I know that you could have different challenges depending on which one of those there are, right?
Yeah.
But what
So if you're
what are people facing?
So if you're using the Microsoft calling plans where they're managing everything, there's not a lot you can do, right? You can manage and you can troubleshoot issues going between the user and the Microsoft Teams cloud, but that's where it ends. And that's all fine. So that's the same sort of thing that you would be troubleshooting if the user was doing a P2P call, a person-to-person call, or a conference. Now, when we did this webinar, we did a survey question and we said, okay, how many people are using either direct routing or the calling plans or a combination thereof? And from the answers, it seems like, and this is kind of what we expected, about 75% of all customers are using direct routing. And there's various reasons for that. Some of it comes down to cost, and other it comes down to availability. Microsoft doesn't have availability throughout the world. They only have it in select markets. So there's still a huge portion of the world where telephony is something you're still going to have to manage. So vast majority of people are going to be using the direct routing scenario. And the biggest problem that administrators are facing is visibility. How do I see, how can I track the quality of a call from the user to Microsoft Teams Cloud, from the Teams Cloud to my SBC, from my SBC to my SIP provider? That's the biggest challenge. And right now, the tools that Microsoft gives you, they don't really show you what's going on. And at least they don't show you in a way that's easily digestible, be able to see what's going on with those other legs. Like, sure, you can always go to the Teams admin panel and you can look up a user and see their calls, and it's going to show you the media stream quality between Microsoft and that user. But it's not going to show you anything about the media stream from Microsoft to the SBC or from the SBC to the SIP provider. So that's a big hole. So of course, someone could have a great connection to Microsoft, but then if there's something going on in your data center that's causing congestion, network congestion, because there's too many calls or something like that, and it's causing call quality issues, you know what? You look at Microsoft tool, it's going to tell you everything's just hunky-dory, everything's fine. But you need a tool to be able to tell you what's going on those two other legs.
And it's a common problem, though, right? Because at Microsoft, they're really responsible for, and what they really care about the most, right, is Microsoft, their tool, what it's doing, how it's performing. So knowing what's happening with, once it leaves that environment is almost like, why would they have visibility, right? Like, it's just not their area. And as long as they can keep their piece functioning, that's their goal. So, and why I say that is this is kind of a common problem. And it's been a problem for a long time when you have very specific vendor-based tools for your infrastructure that they have no visibility. Nobody, as much as they want to, has a single vendor hardly in anything. And so there's that demarcation point of visibility once you get outside of that vendor.
Exactly. Yeah. And Microsoft, they're going to extend things so you can see some information about the leg from Teams to the SBC, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still thing is it's late information. It's information you're only going to get after the call is finished, right? So if you're managing your SBC, you don't want to be waiting for call data to be showing up in Microsoft's tool before you can tell there's a problem. You want to know in real time or as close to real time as possible if there's any issues, right? So it's important to have a tool that's going to be able to give you that sort of visibility in real
I
time.
think the other key thing is that if you're going to use direct routing and you're taking these PSTN calls and you're putting them back on-prem, one of the other key reasons why you would be doing that is to integrate with some other existing infrastructure that's on premises, which Microsoft's not going to have any visibility to at all. So you've got, even for things like, being able to have your dial plans work correctly, if you've got dial plans, branch to branch dial plans, those kinds of things in place, emergency call routing. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are tied to this that, can be a part of this infrastructure that if you're just counting on the, let's call it the free tools that you get from Microsoft, you're just simply not going to be able to get in and troubleshoot these situations. And that means you're reliant on calling Microsoft
Right.
for support, which is that really what you want to do too? Is that what you want to do is call Microsoft directly when you've got, calls that aren't completing. It's, for people who are professionals in this business, you probably want to be able to go in and troubleshoot this stuff yourself.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that leans towards there's more than just a point-to-point call. That's just more than me calling Tim, through Microsoft Teams. These environments. I mean, you think about healthcare or finance that have very critical, phone infrastructures where customers are calling in to, very detailed IVRs that have to route these calls very specifically to certain departments and, et cetera. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot more to it.
Get transferred around. Yeah, there's all sorts of things. Yeah.
So I know that obviously this is Nectar, right? So, how has either one of you probably could answer this but how has this changed with this massive work from home scenario? I mean, it was easier when you had a lot of people in an office and you can kind of manage that, and we talked about it a little bit, but are they facing new challenges and new problems that they weren't before, especially with the giant shift overnight to home?
Yeah, well, definitely. Like it's you've moved people from a controlled environment to essentially a almost completely uncontrolled environment, right?
Yeah.
So people working from home now, they have to deal with their home internet, their Wi-Fi, their kids trying to be on their Xbox and YouTube and Netflix and Disney Plus and all this sort of stuff. Then you got to deal with your local loop and your ISP, and then just the all general internet, and then Microsoft, your SBCs, there's a lot of challenges involved here, and it's really difficult to get a handle on this sort of stuff again without some kind of tool again that's going to help make sense of all this noise, like make a sense of all this jumbled mess of data that's out there, because there's a ton of data out there, and it's just a matter of putting it all together in a way that's able to help administrators make decisions, or be able to come to conclusions in an environment where you really have very little direct actual data. It's a challenge.
Yeah,
it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I know. I kind of take that for granted sometimes. Being an IT person, there's the layman IT people out there who don't really understand how that works, and I have my home network set up in a way where I have QoS where my kids can't hit my bandwidth hard enough, and I happen to be lucky enough to live in an area where we have gig fiber to the house too. So it's and I wired my house up so I have more wired connections than I do Wi-Fi, because these little they struggle these days because these little routers that your service providers give you that have Wi-Fi connection on them were never meant to hold as many things as we have connected to them at home. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
If you look at it, I think I looked at one point before I kind of redid my home network. I think I had 70 plus devices hanging off. I mean, everything to your light switches, your garage door. It's crazy how many things are connected to Wi-Fi when you really sit down and think about it. But I can only imagine. I get phone calls from people that just struggle because of that.
Yeah, and the thing is, and we're experts at this stuff. That's the crazy thing. I have 41 wireless devices connected right now. It's wild.
Yeah,
Wild.
yeah, it's nuts.
I think the other reality of what's happened with work from home is that Microsoft themselves has struggled to keep up with the load, and that Microsoft's not unique. All of the providers in the collaboration UC and contact center space have all struggled to keep up with the load and how that load is shifted, and I think that's reflected in weird ways for a lot of organizations where calls into your ACD that normally function kind of as you would expect, where you're prompted with a standard greeting, thank for calling Acme Corp, press 1 for accounting, press 2 for billing, whatever, and then all of a sudden that doesn't work as expected, and it's because the call volumes into Microsoft are so significant that their logic isn't working as as expected. So we've definitely seen that happening.
Yeah, we experienced it this week, right? We had a conference call just a couple days ago where it took forever, like, because Teams has been pretty much flawless for months. Like, there was a blip in March when things really hit the fan, but things as Microsoft kind of got used to things, it seemed to settle out. And everything's been fine all summer. But then this week, all of a sudden, starting to see weird things again. And then Tim brought up a good point. It's probably because schools are going back, and a lot of schools are doing remote learning, and it's causing increased load because we did see that. And then Microsoft did actually say, yes, there's people are having issues connecting to meetings in the US. Because it was funny, because we were on a meeting in Teams hosted from the US, and we ended up having to switch to a different tool.
Yeah.
And because it just, nobody could join in. But then literally 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, I joined another conference call on Teams, and it joined just like that. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, the person who joined on it was hosted out of the UK. So it's interesting. So it wasn't until we had to go and log in to Microsoft Admin Center and then go look and see the advisory. But once we saw the advisory, I go, oh, okay, that makes sense now. But that's took a lot of time to get to that.
Right. So in the webinar, Tim, you talked about several different areas that we touch upon, and how a lot of the terms can get used or intermingled between each other, right? Between analytics and monitoring and testing and, et cetera. So I think you've got 4 areas. If you want to, I know we talked about it in the thing, but if you want to touch what are those 4 areas, and then, Ken, if you could kind of go into maybe at least one of those of how Nectar is able to help. I mean, it's Nectar Call, Nectar Podcast. Got to get a little plug here at the end about, how we can help in some of these environments. And I think, I don't know, Tim or Ken, I think testing was a big thing you also wanted to talk about, as well as monitoring and analytics. So if you can, Tim, can you give us kind of where do we fit in these 4 areas?
I'll go over the 4 workloads real quick. So I think that's key. I think that, for UC operations, the way that we see the world, there's really 4 things that, that we're at least heavily involved with, that I think are key to the conversation and often get confused. A lot of people talk about reporting, and reporting being the tool that you use, but I break it down by four things. So the first one is analytics. So analytics is being able to just understand at a broad scale what's happening in your environment. So I want to see the big picture, the forest from the trees, so to speak, and I want to be able to understand how things are trending, perhaps by geography, perhaps by modality, whatever it might be. But I'm looking at the big picture, and I want to be able to do some filters and slice and dice that a little bit. So that's analytics, and I think that's helpful for more than just troubleshooting and quality. Analytics is helpful for business planning. Analytics is helpful to understand what tools people are using within your organization, potentially what conference rooms, once we go back to actually using conference rooms, people are using. So analytics is really key. Monitoring is another one that often gets confused. Monitoring is to me, that's about like watching the environment and looking for the health and performance of things, and looking for things that go outside of a healthy threshold. And that's tied to alerting. So monitoring and alerting get lumped together. The third one is troubleshooting. So now this is really where you're talking about wanting to go in, dive down deep, typically into a call, might be onto a server, but in on-premises infrastructure, but typically into a call, and I want to troubleshoot and find out what happened with that call. And then that fourth workload is testing. And this is a really critical one that often gets overlooked as a very, very powerful tool to help with the rest of those three, because testing is particularly valuable when it's done in the context of how is your customer experiencing calling into your organization, for example.
Testing is really important in environments like Teams where you don't have any visibility into what's actually going on in there. So testing helps you get a sense of how things are performing with regular, consistent tests at regular intervals.
Yeah. What are some of the key things we're testing with some of this?
Right. Well, we talked about on the webcast in the context of Teams. So regardless of how you connect to the PSTN, so whether you're connecting via direct routing or if you're connecting via Microsoft calling plan, when you're calling into the Microsoft phone system, by the time you hit the Microsoft phone system, it doesn't matter. So by the time you hit that auto attendant and the call queues and the call routing policies that you've built inside Microsoft phone system, it doesn't matter whether or not you came in over the PSTN or through Microsoft calling plans. What you're really trying to test is your configuration and the operation of those environments. And you've left it up to Microsoft to kind of make sure that those things work, but there's still configuration elements that need to be tested that are typically done by a partner or an administrator. And that's where Nectar's CX Assurance platform comes in, because what we're doing is it's a cloud-based service, but you're not coming in over SIP or an RTP protocol. What you're doing is you're actually dialing a PSTN number. So you're dialing a phone number and coming in through the SIP trunk, just as a customer would if they were calling in, and then you're hitting that auto attendant and the call queues just as a customer would. And our platform is entirely automated, so we will listen to the call queues. We'll monitor for changes in those call queues. We can monitor for changes in the press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and we can test to make sure all that is working well. And if it's not working well, then we can do alerting, and then you're notified then when things aren't working as you would expect them to.
There's a common thing that I've seen more often than I care to really admit, but with Microsoft Teams, with the auto attendants, I've seen more than one case where you dial the auto attendant and you get dead air. Yeah. And then you hang up, you call it back, and you get something next time. So there's, and again, this week, we've been seeing some issues with that. And normally, like most administrators don't have the time to be dialing in and checking all this thing every day to see, great, it's answering, great, it answered. That's the step 1. Number 2, is it playing back the message I'm supposed to be playing? Number 3, is it able to transfer to users like I'm expecting it to do? Number 4, if the user doesn't answer, is it going to get to their voicemail okay? So what we can do with CX Assurance is we can test in one call, we can test every bits of those paths and alert you whenever any one of those goes bad. Okay. And which is fantastic, because most tools out there will just test to say, yeah, it picked up, great. I got a 200 okay, it picked up, great, all done, thank you, bye. But yeah, we go way deeper than just pick up or not picked up.
I like the cues where you call in and you press the number where it sends you, and then it just hangs up.
Yeah.
That's someone who wasn't testing, right? That's someone who didn't test their environment, and so what ends up happening is, if you're lucky, you find out about that because a customer complains. Yeah. If you're not lucky, you never find out that the customer complained. You've lost the customer, and that's honestly, more often than not. And so, I mean, what I love about this is that it really actually gets down to a business discussion about, what's your company's brand, the value to the customer, and protecting your reputation and your brand in the eye of the customer who's calling you. You pay attention to whether or not your website's up, right? You pay attention to whether or not your emails are up. You got to pay attention to whether or not your phones are working as expected. And just because you've outsourced that platform to Microsoft's cloud or any other cloud for that matter, doesn't mean that it's not still important to keep testing that.
Yeah, for sure. So we're getting kind of down to the end. So kind of want to talk also about the analytics, monitoring, and troubleshooting. So Ken, how are we helping from that perspective?
Well, first of all, with Teams, we are able to subscribe to Microsoft's Call Data API, which allows us to get call data information for PSTN calls, peer-to-peer, and all those wonderful things in pretty
That's fairly
close.
new too, isn't it?
It's pretty new. It's been out for in GA since I think April-ish or
Okay.
May.
Not even. Yeah.
May?
Not even.
Yeah, so it's only been like a few months since it's been out there, but so that allows vendors like us to be able to provide value that goes way beyond what Microsoft is able to give you in their tool sets. Because Microsoft's got some tool sets that are, the CQD call quality dashboard. It's pretty useful for a high level trending type tool, be able to see, hey, how are things doing at the global level, the regional level, and things like that. But what it lacks is the ability to actually get down and dirty and into the nitty gritty details. Like, so great, it'll tell you, it says, yeah, you seem to be having issues with calls going to this location when people are on Wi-Fi. Okay, great. So who's affected by that? Well, the tools won't help you with that. So because the Microsoft, when you go to the Teams Admin Center, there's nowhere where you can actually just get a list of calls and show me all the calls that were bad or on people are on Wi-Fi in the New York office. So that's a big problem. Like, you have to find a user first and then go to that user, and then you can see all their calls. If you want to see someone else's calls, you got to back out of that, go look for another user, go into theirs, look for it's not a terribly friendly or easy way to do that. So our tools, we make that available to you. So we make it really easy for people to slice and dice that data, to be able to say things going, hey, yeah, show me all the people who had poor calls out of the New York office on July the 4th, who made calls to external participants and we're not using VPN. Like, we can get all right down to that, and we'll show you a list. You can dig into it with just a click and be able to see all that wonderful information.
And then dive down into a call, right? Then like drill down into a specific call and see what happened on that particular call.
And then
what
particularly
headset someone was using.
And with PSTN calls, we can go even deeper, right? So again, if you recall from earlier, the only information we get is for that Microsoft, from the user to the Microsoft leg of the call. But with our tools, you can dig into, if you're using direct routing, you can dig into the Microsoft to the SBC leg and the SBC to the SIP provider leg.
Oh, wow.
So we get much deeper information out of those legs than you will ever get out of Microsoft's tools.
Yeah, I think that's a real point of a black hole, right? To a lot of people, is that leg from your SBC out to the provider. Talk a little bit about that. That's always been something close to me, especially my past coming from, I think, the technology that brought that to Nectar, right? So talk about what it is and how that's important to this piece, being able to look at that.
Yeah, so it's important. Yeah, so we're able to watch the SBC, and we can see calls that are coming into and going out of that, and then we're actually watching the wire. So even though the traffic is encrypted, because none of this traffic's coming in off the wire just like unencrypted, right? It's encrypted, but we are still able to get enough information from those packets to be able to identify, jitter, packet loss, round trip time, and all that, and be able to identify where the problem originated. Did it originate on the Microsoft to the SBC leg, or is the problem going from your SBC to the SIP provider leg? So it's very useful information, and it's also useful because, again, we're getting this stuff in real time. So you can be monitoring your SBCs, and if things are going sideways, like you see your SIP provider, all of a sudden packets are being dropped. You're not waiting for looking at Microsoft's tools, which, again, unless a person complains, you're not going to know anything. You'd have to go and look at the trends, and it could be days before you realize, wait a minute, we've been dropping packets and calls have been crappy because of whatever issues forever. And that's assuming you were able to even see that information in the first place, but you can't.
Mhm.
So with our tools, we can get that in real time. So that's incredibly powerful and useful to anybody who's using direct routing and is managing their own SBCs. Because again,
Yeah, and I actually
otherwise
found
you're
that
totally blind.
providers actually they actually like the fact that if it's from the SIP provider and you know it's coming from them and you're able to provide in your original trouble ticket with them concrete evidence of that, it helps them resolve your issue faster. And while
Exactly.
they definitely want their service to function at a high level, and you don't ever want to have a problem, they actually appreciate the fact that you're able to come to them with, say, look what I've got, this is what it's showing, and they can dig down into it really quickly.
Yeah, because
Here's the
things
packet
you can give
capture,
them,
smoking
yeah,
gun.
the packet
Yeah.
capture, we can give them, a PCAP of
Yeah.
the call and just say, here you go. It's not like, again, like historically, this is the thing that I always had to do. Someone complained, they had a bad call or whatever. It's like, okay, all right, well, I wasn't monitoring it right then. Let me get a PCAP.
Yeah.
Try making that call again. I'm going to start
Replicate the
capturing
problem.
now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm capturing now. You're making the call, make the call. Okay, you made the call, and then you filter out all the other crap that came through and package up and away you go. And that's assuming that the problem's still happening.
Right,
But with
right.
every call, with our tools, we capture the packet capture so that you can analyze it well after the fact and send the whole package off to your service provider and say, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
Now, one thing, this is a question that comes up often. Oh, so can you get media from the call? No, we can't. The packets are still encrypted, and because we don't need it. We don't need to decrypt it. We don't
Right.
care about what's going on in the actual conversation. I don't care what you and Tim are talking about. I just need to know, are the packets getting there, and are they getting there intact?
Right.
So
It's juicy though. What Stephen and I talk about.
I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I really don't want to know. It's Friday afternoon and I haven't had a drink yet. So come on. Don't do this to me.
I mean, it's been great conversation about server settings, software release candidates, versioning. I mean, who wouldn't want to hear about that?
I know.
It's good stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, I think
All
that's
right.
going to bring us to the end of it for the day. So, Ken, do you want to leave us with what do we have coming up next? What webinars are on the horizon? How can you hear more about what Nectar's doing?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I think I probably have a better view than Ken does. Yeah, so we've got a bunch of really good stuff coming up. We've got our next month we're going to be covering, and so in September we're going to be covering some new features that we have that are relevant to Avaya contact center managers around understanding vectors and how those vectors flow and being able to visually represent that. And just kind of take a look and deep dive on VDNs, and so that I think will be really valuable. And then we're going to continue on that in the following month and go back and take a look at some Cisco things. So there's a lot that's going on across the major UC platforms here at Nectar, and on top of that, we've got some other pretty exciting solutions that we're going to be talking about as we get towards the end of the year. That are relevant for people who manage contact center environments, particularly in financial services areas. So lots going on, and we'll cover that in more detail as these things become more kind of ready for us to announce.
Yes, and as the person who's getting all this stuff into the product before the end of the year, I am familiar with the load that we have that's coming in. So we definitely have a lot coming up. So it's going to be a pretty exciting end of the year for us.
Yeah, for sure.
So really good stuff. Well, guys, I want to thank you for your time today. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, we have a few more out there that you can look at. We will have some more coming up, and as Tim said, we have several webinars where you can see some of the new things that we have at Nectar. And absolutely stay tuned through the end of the year. We have a lot coming that's going to be really good for the industry, and I think a lot of people will be really excited about. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks.